So be sure to check both of those out. And now for the main event, why you all are here. We have Ron Currie with us here today to talk about the savage noble Death of Babs Dionne. So Ron is the award-winning author of 5 novels. He has won the New York Public Library's Young Lions Award, the Addison M. Metcalf Award, the Alex Award, and the Pushcart Prize. His books have been translated into 15 languages, and his short fiction and nonfiction have received recognition in Best American Anthologies. As a screenwriter, he worked most recently on the Apple TV Plus series Extrapolations, and has developed projects with AMC Studios, Amblin Television, and ITV America. He lives in Portland, Maine, and he teaches in the University of Southern Maine Stone Coast MFA program. Let's all welcome Ron.
Thank you for a wonderful introduction, and thanks to Watermark Books for hosting me here. They have gone above and beyond, and then some, in promoting the book and supporting the book and promoting this event. So it means an awful lot, and I'm glad you're all here because I came a long way to be here. So a couple of quick things. Does anybody, who here has no idea what this book is about, or very little idea what this book is about? So some of you have a little bit of an idea. The reason I ask is because I'm working on my my elevator pitch for the book, because it's circulating in Hollywood. And the one I've come up with, let's see if it makes you want to read it. Imagine if your grandmother was Tony Soprano. Yeah? You want to read? Cool. I feel like it's pretty solid, but who here has been to Maine, where I'm from? Handful of you, okay. Of those of you who have been to Maine, what do you think of, like, what's the instantaneous reaction when I say Maine? What are you thinking of? What do you visualize?
Coastline.
Sorry?
Lobster.
Lobster, of course, yes. We'll come back to lobster in a minute. Wyeth, Andrew Wyeth, sure. Rocky Coast, maybe.
Yep.
Lighthouses.
Pretty beautiful.
Beautiful. None of that stuff is in this book. I'm not lying, am I? The reason being that I grew up in interior Maine, which was a land of paper mills, textile mills, endless forest, and hard luck and hard people. It's very different from the popular imagination of Maine, which is part of the reason I wanted to write this book in the first place, because I felt like the Maine that I think one of the characters in the book says that growing up in central Maine, she might as well have grown up in Nebraska in terms of, you know, the sense of the part of Maine that most people think of when they think of the state. So that's sort of where this story is coming from. So there were 3 things that came together to finally, I've been circling this story I've been writing books for 20 years, and I've been circling a version of this story for that entire time. And 3 things had to come together in order to finally make it happen. The first was my Franco-American heritage. Does everybody know what it means to be Franco-American, have some sense? So, in a nutshell, I'm descended from subsistence farmers who came after the Civil War to work in the factories in New England. There's several 100,000 who came down and never left. And they were treated as second-class citizens, as people always are in America when they first get here, right? Whoever's last off the boat gets the shit end of the stick, and that's how it works. Some things never change. And that heritage of mine, so my generation sort of straddled the line between the Franco-American experience that was very much alive, where, you know, my grandmother, who figures heavily into the character of Babs Dionne in this book, she spoke French all the time. She and her friends, like, my strongest memories of childhood are of sitting on the periphery of her kitchen and listening to them chatter in rapid fire Quebecois with cigarette smoke drifting overhead, and they're pounding Maxwell House coffee and having a great time. My father didn't speak English until he went to school, and I don't speak a lick of French. So the assimilation occurred completely in one generation, to the point where at my age now, I'll be 50 in a couple of months, I felt like there are times when I feel like I made it all up. Like, it can't possibly be true that everybody in my neighborhood spoke French. That's weird. How is that possible? So in a way, I ended up writing this book as to validate those memories and create a record of a world that no longer exists. The second thing was a story that my aunt told me. So she was of my father's generation, baby boomers, and when she was a kid, this is an example of the sort of discrimination I'm talking about against Francos. The police in Waterville had key rings that had the key to every business in town. Ostensibly so that they could go around and check and make sure that the businesses were secure. But what they were actually doing was going around and stealing things from Franco businesses. And my aunt had an uncle who was Anglo. I don't know how he ended up in the family. But he was a cop, and she knew whenever she got a gift from him that it was stolen from somewhere. I think the practice was that widespread. So that figures into this story as well, quite prominently. It's a central thing. And then the third thing, I mentioned that my grandmother was sort of, I'm being very careful how I talk about this, because my grandmother was not a criminal, as Babs is in the book, but my grandmother was pretty gangster. And I saw her once put a cat in a clothes dryer and turn it on to make a point to somebody in the neighborhood, which was pretty cold-blooded, especially I think I was 7 or 8. And she was so hard with other people, and I bore witness to it all the time, but she and I were thick as thieves, and she was always super gentle with me. So there's a relationship in the book between Babs and her grandson Jason that sort of mirrors the relationship I have with my grandmother. So those were the three things that sort of contributed to my beginning this book. And then, like all good books, I think it's good. It took on a life of its own and became something other than what inspired it. To give you an idea of sort of the feel of the thing, I'm going to read a few short passages that touch on three of the central characters. Babs, her daughter Lori, who's an Afghanistan vet. She served 3 tours in Afghanistan, left home right after high school. In fact, before she got her diploma, she left home and joined the Marines, never intended to come back. But the confluence of two things, she got dishonorably discharged from the Marines, and her father died, brought her back home, even though she doesn't want to be there. And then there's a character in the book called the Man. He's sort of elemental. He almost doesn't have an identity. Whenever anybody in the book asks him who he is, he says, "Who I am doesn't matter." It's what he's here for and what he's capable of that matters. And he has come to town to take Babs' drug business away from her and seize it for his boss. This first section that I'm going to read takes place in 1968. The central story in the book is set in 2016. This prologue, I call it a prelude because there's so much French in the book, takes place in 1968 when Babs is 14. And the section that I'm going to read occurs immediately after what is sort of a really terrible formative thing that happens to Babs that's perpetrated upon her. And the person who does it, she ends up killing them. And now we're going to see her in the immediate aftermath of that. I guess the other thing I should mention is that a big part of being Franco-American was being Catholic, and that's going to figure into this scene as well. Also, it's in second person. So when I say you, I mean Babs. Don't take it personally. Okay. So you turned right onto the road, and with Scott's blood stiffening on your shirt and bare legs, began the long walk back into town. Past the last few straggling houses on Water Street, where no one was home because they all worked first shift at the mill. then into the more heavily populated section of Little Canada, where it was impossible to avoid being noticed. The men were gone, as they always seemed to be, swallowed up by the brick monolith of the mill during the day and the bar rooms after second shift ended. But the women were there hanging laundry, and the children were there playing in puddles from the previous night's thunderstorms. And as you walked past slow and calm, they stopped what they were doing and gawked, some of the kids following at a distance for a few steps. No one spoke. No one asked what had happened, whether you were okay, where you were going. The mere sight of you, the horror and mystery of it, precluded talk of any kind. Everyone recognized that, at least in those moments, you existed in a state beyond language. There was something holy about what they were witnessing, the solemnity, the sacrament of blood. And your people knew to surround the holy with a good deal of silence. In fact, those who saw you were reluctant to talk even to each other, at least until you had passed. And even then, they gathered close and spoke only in whispers as they kept an eye on your receding figure. You turned left onto Grove Street and climbed the hill, past the cemetery where Jean rested. Her brother Jean was killed in Vietnam. Your pace steady, your eyes up and on the road ahead. At the top of the hill, you turned right onto Gold Street, then left onto Preston. By now, switchboard operators downtown were bombarded with a rush of phone calls. And had these calls not all come at once, they might have dispatched the police a few minutes sooner. But most everyone trying to report the teenage girl naked from the waist down and slathered in blood got nothing but the dull blare of a busy signal. And before the first police car made its way into Little Canada, you had already passed through the doors of Notre Dame Parish and into the perpetual twilight of the nave, where no one but God could punish you for Scott's death. You walked to the first set of pews in front of the altar, took a seat on the right, and waited. The pew was cool under your thighs, and you could feel Scott's blood binding wood and skin like glue. On the wall behind the altar, of course, Jesus, hanging limp and dead, stripped to the waist, a bloody gash between his ribs. You'd spent hundreds of hours in this room. 5 feet from where you sat, you'd been baptized at 6 days old, so small you fit in one of your father's big, gentle hands. More recently, you'd been confirmed on the very same spot, white as January in your special dress, on display for God and the whole neighborhood. In this room, you'd stood for the gospel and knelt for communion, exchanged handshakes with your neighbors, and dropped crisp dollar bills from your father's billfold into wicker baskets as they passed among the faithful. But most of your time in Notre Dame had been spent ignoring homilies and mumbling through prayers while you contemplated the one thing about the entire affair that actually interested you, the Stations of the Cross. From where you sat, you could see all 14 stations, depicted in stained glass around the perimeter of the nave and backlit by sunlight. Over your right shoulder, Jesus was condemned by Pilate to death. Over your left, his body was placed in the tomb in advance of the resurrection. In between, on 12 windows equally spaced around the circular room, the whole of his ordeal played out in hues of red, orange, and blue. Up until today, the only time you'd spent in the church that wasn't mandated were the long moments you passed contemplating these images. Your interest was hardly devotional. You were just fascinated by how macabre and obvious the whole thing was. The blood, the agony, the melodrama, the message that to suffer is to be divine, a subtext so obvious it barely qualified as subtext. Studying the stations, you sometimes wondered what an alien would think if you told them the central religious ritual of a third of Earth's inhabitants involved simulated cannibalism. Instead of praying at the stations as was expected, you would kneel and think about how if Jesus had been executed in America, everyone you knew would probably wear little gold electric chairs around their necks. "You look," said a man's voice in French, "as though you're in need of confession." You turned and saw Father Clement Thibault, though at first you almost didn't recognize him. He appeared the same as always from the neck up, brown crew cut atop a cherubic face that made him look half as old as his 30 years. But what threw you off were the jeans and mattress plaid. Since he'd arrived at Notre Dame less than a year before, You'd only ever seen Father Clement in his all during services, or in a black shirt and pants on the front stairs of the parish after Mass. Now here he was, dressed like he should be seated next to you in civics class. "Are you hurt?" he asked. You shook your head. "That's not your blood," he said, half statement, half question. "Not most of it," you told him. In the short time he'd been in charge of the parish, Father Clement had developed a reputation as easygoing and casual, a Vatican II priest all the way, which not everyone in the neighborhood, particularly older men who had a hard time seeing someone half their age as a proxy for God, cared for. He smoked openly, often right outside the door of his rectory across from the church, and was said to be a regular at Heward's Tavern on Gold Street, always at the bar, always alone, always with a glass of whiskey, neat. He was the first priest anyone had ever known to perform Mass in French instead of Latin. Wild rumors about his life before the priesthood abounded. He'd been a jazz trumpeter, he'd had problems with drugs, he'd been married. You hoped that in one way at least, Father Clement would behave just like the church always had, making wayward sheep, particularly the young ones, disappear when they got into trouble. He gazed at you for a long moment, then walked briskly up the aisle and locked the doors. "Did anyone see you come in here?" he called out. "I don't know," you said. Father Clement lingered at the entrance, peering through the glass up and down the street, then came back down the aisle and walked straight past you toward the sacristy. "Father," you said. "Don't say anything," he called over his shoulder. He passed through a door directly underneath where Jesus hung and was gone for several minutes. Father Clement returned with a hand towel and a rumpled pair of jeans. He approached and gave you the towel, careful not to let his eyes stray below your face. "Use that to clean up best you can," he said. "These pants probably won't fit great, but they were the first thing I found in the donation pile." This close you could hear his breath coming fast and see the confusion in his eyes despite his efforts to remain calm and priestly. "Don't you want to know what happened?" you asked. Father Clement held up a hand. "Obviously I have no idea what's going on," he said. "What I do know is you came to me because you need help, and I intend to help you, but we have to do this the right way." "Okay," you said. "If you say anything out here, we're just two people talking. Whatever you tell me, I can and maybe will have to report to someone else. But if you wait until we're in the confessional, if we do this right, I cannot and will not tell anyone a word of what you say. Because I will know your sins as God knows them, and no man can compel God to tell what he knows." You cocked your head. "That's Thomas Aquinas," he said. "He had thoughts on a few things." You just stared. "Never mind," he said. "Go to the ladies' room, clean yourself up, and come find me. Comprenez-vous?" 10 minutes later, mostly free of Scott's blood and hitching up the pair of men's size 32 jeans with one hand, you let yourself into the penitent side of the confessional and closed the door. "Good afternoon," Father Clement said, his shape barely discernible on the other side of the lattice privacy screen. You knelt facing the screen and crossed yourself. "Bless me, Father, for I have sinned," you said. "It's been 8 days since my last confession." "May the Lord help you confess your sins," Father Clement said. "Amen." And then, for a few moments, neither of you spoke. "I don't know how to start," you said finally. "I think," Father Clement said, "that we can skip the missed homework assignments and unclean thoughts and get straight to the reason you showed up at God's house covered in blood." "I killed Scott Markey," you said. "A cop?" "I stabbed him." "One would guess," Father Clement said. "Tabarnak, are you sure he's dead?" "If he wasn't when I left him," you said, "he is now." "But why, Barbara?" "Same reason I came in here with no pants on." At this, Father Clement was silent for a moment. Then, "Pray for him with me." "What?" "No. Barbara, Jesus agonizes over his soul, same as yours." "You sure that's the point you want to make?" you said, "when I can still feel him inside me?" Another pause from Father Clement. Then he recited the Hail Mary alone, so hushed you could only hear the S sounds whistling faintly between his teeth. "Now," he said, when he'd finished praying in vain for Scott's salvation, "tell me everything." God already knows what happened. "True," he said, "but I don't. And in order to help you repair a mortal sin, I have to know everything God knows." "A mortal sin? You killed a man, Barbara." "He raped me." "Please, just tell me what happened." "Fine. What happened was Sasha forgot where he came from." "Sasha? That was Scott's name before he changed it." "I don't understand," Father Clement said. "Sure you do. Uppity Frenchmen change their names, turn their backs on their own people. Sasha was stealing from my uncle's store. I told him to stop, so he raped me. Then I killed him. The end." "Barbara," Father Clement said, "if I'm going to help you, you have to be sorry for what you did. Genuinely sorry." "But I'm not." "I understand, but you don't actually. You can't." "I'm trying," Father Clement said. "Let me ask you a question," you said. "Of course. If Jesus died for my sins, why do I have to repent?" "It may surprise you to know," Father Clement said, "that this is a question I wrestle with myself quite often." "So what's the answer?" "The answer," he said, "is that there is no neat answer. Real faith, contrary to popular sentiment, is hardly blind. God's favored children are those who struggle hardest to know him. And in return for that favor, we must do what he asks, even if we don't think it makes sense. Particularly if we don't think it makes sense." "That doesn't make sense," you said. "Fair enough," Father Clement said. "We don't have much time, Babs, so let me tell you how I see things." "Okay." "I have a friend with the Sisters of St. Joseph in Vermont. She'll take you in. You'll leave right away. You will not see anyone or say goodbye. You may not ever be able to come back. Do you understand?" "So I have to pretend to be a nun?" "No pretending," Father Clement said. "As far as the sisters are concerned, you will be there as a novitiate. You'll help with their work in the school and with the poor. You will pray your ass off morning, noon, and night. You'll take classes and tend the gardens and probably get pretty good at quilting. And then, if we decide you can come back, you'll have to be ready to confess and repent. I can't emphasize that enough, Babs. It might be a year, it might be 3. However long, you should think of it as the time necessary for you to find your way back to God. Focus only on that. And in the meantime, I'll do what I can here." "God's going to be disappointed," you said, "if he's waiting around for me to say what I did was wrong." Father Clement sighed on the other side of the screen. "Pride is the mother of all sins, Babs," he said. "That's Thomas Aquinas too." "I'm getting sick of him already," you said. In your absence, the story of what you'd done to Sasha grew and transformed, whispered behind hands and retold over beers in the lumberyard and the laundromat, living rooms and bar rooms. Imagine a girl of 14 gutting a grown man, a cop no less, and leaving him to bleed out in the woods. And when you returned 5 years later, everyone in Little Canada knew but did not say, this was your neighborhood, these were your streets, and it would remain thus forever and ever. Amen. So that's the end of the prologue. Praise God. Fast forward to 2016 and Father Clement's still waiting for Babs to confess, which becomes a point of contention between them. So that's Babs as a girl. And this next section, she's not much different as an adult. Maybe a little crustier, but not much. She's hard. I love her. This section is about the man. So, funny story actually. This morning when I was leaving Houston, I came in from Houston today, and I called an Uber to pick me up. And when I looked at the thing and I saw the car that was coming, it said a white Impala, which is what the man drives in this book. And I got a little spooked. I try to pretend that I'm not superstitious, but I'm super superstitious. He was perfectly fine though. So the man is systematically closing in on Babs, trying to figure out her organization, who she works with, how they know her, and who she is ultimately. And in this scene, he is going to talk to the doctor who writes the fake prescriptions for opioids that she uses to get the drugs. Across town, the man's Impala slipped into the Lovejoy Medical Clinic parking lot, which as dusk fell was empty except for one other vehicle, a late model Range Rover with enough luxury and tech features to satisfy a Saudi prince. The man got out of his car, examined the Range Rover briefly, but with no small amount of appreciation, then went up the stairs to the clinic entrance, finding it locked. Though he was wanted in both the United States and Canada, one RCMP detective had recently taken early retirement after growing so obsessed over a decade of hunting the man that he'd had a nervous breakdown. He made no effort to hide himself from the clinic's security cameras. Inside, Michael Laverdier, DO, sat at the desk in his office, updating patient records and smoking a joint, tapping ash onto the floor for the overnight cleaning service to deal with. Like the man, Laverdier was a criminal. Unlike the man, Laverdier assumed, incorrectly, that his extra-legal activities were not known to law enforcement. And so he hid in plain sight, even presented himself as an altruist of sorts, working for substandard pay at this clinic that serviced mostly poor rural patients. The truth was, though, that Laverdier worked at the clinic because he was a shitty doctor and could afford to stay in that job because of his felonious side hustle, which, until the man's arrival that night, had been low impact and lucrative in equal measure. Unlike most of his classmates from St. George's Medical School in Granada, Laverdier had long since paid off his student loans. Though single, he owned a 7-bedroom house with several acres of lakefront in the coveted and very expensive Belgrade Lakes region. He took 3 trips to Las Vegas each year to lose gobs of money at high-limit blackjack and drink himself blind at the Red Rock. He owned a boat, 2 motorcycles, the Range Rover, a vintage MG, a condo in Myrtle Beach, and a penthouse timeshare on Isla Mujeres off Mexico's Yucatan Peninsula. He always paid for expedited shipping when ordering items online. Every weekday, he burned $2 in gas to drive clear across town and ordered a sextuple vanilla bean mocha latte to the tune of $8.72. All this, and as far as the IRS was concerned, he made $60,000 a year after taxes. Intent on what seemed to be an error in a patient file, Laverdier did not notice when the man materialized, suddenly and silently, in the doorway to his office. And the man was happy to wait there, smiling his Medusa smile, until the doctor finally felt his gaze, glanced up, and jumped in his seat as though he'd been given an electric shock. "Jesus Christ," Laverdier said. "I'm sorry," the man said. "I didn't mean to startle you." Laverdier stared. "Okay," the man said. "I did mean to startle you." "How did you get in here?" Laverdier asked. The man hooked a thumb toward the entrance. "Through the front door," he said. "I told Claire to lock up." "She did," the man said. The blood fled from Laverdier's face. "Who are you?" he asked. The man stepped into the room and leaned against a bookcase, arms folded. "Who I am is not important at all," he said. "What I want is much more relevant to this conversation. But the truly important thing is who I work for. I assume you've heard of Ogopogo?" Laverdier's eyes widened. In the interest of saving time, let me fill in the blanks," the man said. "There are 2 Ogopogos in Canada. The first is a mythical monster. Lives in a lake in British Columbia, according to legend. A serpent, 50 feet long. This isn't the Ogopogo who employs me. Perhaps that goes without saying, but I always like to clarify." "Clarity is good," Laverdier said. "The second Ogopogo is my employer, and he is no myth. Ogo is Canadian, however, which means he is polite, enjoys ice sculpture and hockey. But he has a cruel streak. Once on his orders, I fed a live human being to a pair of white tigers. This person was, until the time of the tiger incident, one of Ogopogo's private drivers. and his crime was having failed to pick up Ogo's mother from a hair appointment on time. The verdier swallowed. That seems out of proportion? One could make the case, yes, the man said. The point is this: Canadian children raised on the story of Ogopogo are afraid to go into lakes, convinced a serpent will swallow them. But adults, if they're smart, aren't afraid of myths. They fear men. The man paused, gauging the effect of his words on the verdier. To all appearances, the doctor seemed to be experiencing the correct type of fear. And that brings us to why I'm here, the man said. I need to know who you work for. For the clinic, the verdier said, shifting in his chair. I'm a doctor. The man sighed extravagantly. You're a doctor who has written thousands of fake opioid prescriptions in the past 5 years, he said. And Ogo, as the principal distributor of heroin in the eastern United States and Canada, wants to know who is filling and selling those prescriptions. The verdier stared for a moment, then closed his eyes and threw his head back. Oh, fuck, he said. Indeed, said the man. I can't tell you anything, the verdier said. If I say a word, I'll be in deep shit. You're in deep shit now, the man said. You were in deep shit the moment you agreed to be part of a narcotics ring, the moment you were born, the moment your ancient forebears emerged from the water on clumsy fin-like appendages. You were in deep shit, Dr. Leverrier, from the very moment 5 billion years ago when an amorphous cloud of gas and dust began to spin, ever so slowly at first, then gaining speed until gravity took hold and bits of matter started to stick to one another, forming first the sun, that unremarkable star, then the planets of our solar system, including the one we find ourselves on now, discussing the depth of the shit you're in. I don't have contact with anyone, the verdier said, his voice trembling. The man took a step toward where the verdier was seated, then slowly another. Of course, he said, when viewed with the same lens, that is to say, the lens of geologic time, the shit you're in doesn't even register. Is in fact no shit at all. If, like the most accomplished Buddhist monks, you could place your life and its relative insignificance in the larger context of all creation, you likely wouldn't care even a little about the shit you're in. As with monks self-immolating, the terrible things I will do if I don't learn what I want to know would be of no more importance to you than a housefly's death. Yet, as things stand, it feels safe to assume you're not capable of such an enlightened perspective. You're trapped, as most are, deep in the illusion of a self, with all its frailties and petty desires. The desire to forego suffering, to not experience pain, to avoid at all costs, for example, having someone peel your face off and hold up a mirror to show you your own grinning skull. The verdier was still. He'd ceased to breathe. He stared unblinking into the man's eyes and understood, surely and clearly, that this was a person who had no use for idle threats, that he would do exactly what he described with all the dispassion of a bus driver pulling to the curb to let passengers off. The man took another step forward, within grasping distance of the verdier now. So, he said, would you like to talk, or would you like the tigers? It goes on. So that's the man. What are we doing on time? I'm going to give you a tiny little glimpse of Babs as an adult. This is one of my favorite scenes in the book, and it's very brief. I mentioned we were going to get back to lobsters. In this scene, Babs is getting ready to take her grandson Jason out for lunch, and they're leaving her house and getting into her station wagon when somebody pulls up. Around the same time, Jason and Babs stepped out of her front door and were about to get into her station wagon when a late model Mercedes SUV pulled to the curb and gave a curt, friendly little beep. Babs looked over at the vehicle, one foot already in her own car. Get in, she told Jason. I'll be right back. As she approached the Mercedes, the driver's side window rolled down, revealing a couple in their 30s. Great skin, good teeth, expensive clothes, but casual. Man, it's a hot one today, the man said to Babs. Can I help you with something? Babs asked. We're hoping you can, the man said, showing off those teeth again. We got off the highway looking for lunch and got a little turned around. It's not much of a phone signal down here. Do you know where we can grab some lobster rolls? When I read this for the audience in Maine, they immediately laughed at that. They knew what was coming. Babs smiled darkly. You're about 100 miles from the nearest lighthouse, friend, she said. The man and woman both smiled back at her, a little uncertain now. Here's a bit of trivia most people don't know, Babs said. Lobster used to be prison food. It was considered cruel and unusual punishment to have to eat it more than twice a week. Then some smart marketer came along, and now nice people like you are happy to pay $10 an ounce for what's basically a giant prehistoric cockroach. The man laughed. No kidding, he said. That's really interesting. Anyway, if you could maybe give us directions? Babs stared at him a moment. Sure, I'll give you some directions, she said. Go to the end of the street, take a right. Follow that to the four-way stop, bang a left. Eventually you'll reach I-95. Get on the highway and keep going until you're back in Massachusetts. The couple stared at her now, their expensive smiles snuffed out. And don't ever come down here again, she said. The window rolled up slowly, and the very nice SUV with the very nice couple pulled away, Babs watching it go with a satisfied smile. So that's all I'm going to torment you with for readings. But I'm happy to take any questions you might have about the book or about me within reason.
If you raise your hand, I can bring you the mic.
So I don't really have a question. I guess it's more of a comment, and I'll try to make it short.
Sure.
I'm actually only the first prelude in, so I'm really glad that you started to read that, because you literally read where I left off last
really?
night, and I was like, yes! So it was great. It was like a little magical moment.
That's cool.
I work with a lot of companies in Montreal, so first off, I didn't look you up at all.
Mhm.
They had spoke wonderful things. We're so lucky to have you guys here. They recommend the best books, but they recommended it to me, and I started reading it. I actually didn't even put two and two together that you were a male, because the first part of this book is written so splendidly about women that I go, oh, it's gotta be female, and I'm like, oh shit, and I was like, okay, no, it's a dude. Second comment to that, I was so warmed to hear the Francophone mixed in with this.
Mhm.
I am such a supporter of French everything, French culture, but specifically the Franco-French Canadians, because they're just wonderful humans. But the part in here where you wrote tabernacle, I go, oh, this dude's gotta know somebody who's actually in this, because only people who know that tabernacle is actually secular. It's used as an expletive. So I just thought that was fantastic, and I'm really excited to finish this. I haven't gone very far, but I'm super pumped about it, and this is wonderful to see you.
Thank you. To your point about, thank you very much. To your point about thinking I was a woman when you first started reading, no, not at all. That's as big a compliment as I could possibly hope to get. I mean, ultimately, when you get right down to it, the job of, this thing go out? No. The job of a fiction writer is to occupy the experience of people who are not you. If we weren't able to do that, then fiction as a thing would cease to exist. Everything would just be some version of autobiography. So it's great to hear you say that. With my first book, actually, it's called God is Dead. The opening story is set in the Sudan in a refugee camp. And I think the first piece of mail I ever got regarding my writing was from a woman who lived in Canada, actually, who was a Sudanese refugee. And she wrote to thank me for writing the book, because she had never seen her experience anywhere in Western culture, and she was thanking me for rendering it so accurately. And so we had a little bit of an exchange back and forth, and I couldn't convince her that I was just a white boy from New England. You know what I mean? She was like, "There's no way that you. How did you know this?" And I was like, "It's the trick that we do." So I'm very glad to hear you say that. The other thing is that, you know, Franco communities were very much matriarchal, in part because the men were always either at work or at the bar or in jail or dead. So that was my experience growing up. My entire experience is of being raised by women, and women controlling everything soup to nuts, right? And having to do everything soup to nuts. And so I was actually, I think we were talking about this before the event started, that the writerly sort of orientation to the world is to observe and not really experience. And, okay over there? Yeah. All right. And as such, I took a lot of notes, as it were, observing the women in my life when I was a kid. There's a way to get to know them, I think, is at the time what my priority was, but it served me well in this story.
First of all, I love the book.
Thank
It's
you.
very, very good.
Thank you.
And I think my question is more of the process that you go through, because I'm thinking about the title of the book. And you've inverted 2 words in it.
You noticed?
Noble, it should be noble savage.
Right.
I mean, that's what your English teacher would tell you,
Yeah.
you know. And I guess I'm curious, did you do it? I don't want to say, I don't want to accuse you of not wanting to own it, but I am curious as to why you chose to invert those 2 words.
Yeah. My editor made me. Originally, the book was called The Noble Savage Death of Babs Dionne, and I relied only on the comma to separate the 2 so that it wasn't, you know what I mean? She wanted me to change it, and I was willing to meet her that far and no further by inverting the words. Everybody familiar with the concept of noble savage? I mean, you know, the reason I chose it, regardless of what order the words come in, is twofold. One, I see Babs as a noble savage in a very flattering sense, like she's uncorruptible, and she refuses to be influenced at all by the outside world, right? So she's pure in that way. And the other thing is that, you know, in contemporary usage, the words noble and savage don't often go together, right? They're not exactly antonymous, but they're pretty close. And what I liked about it was that Babs is both noble and savage in life and in death, and I wanted the title to reflect that sort of contradiction, that tension that's at the center of her character, where she is, she never does anything except on principle, which feels noble. But she'll fucking cut you, which is pretty savage. So that's it. My editor didn't do it. I'm disavowing that change.
Hi, I also loved the book. This is fantastic. I'm excited for you up front to read it, because it's going to be, you're going to love it.
I can't wait.
I know you're going to love it.
Thank you.
And on that, so you have some amazing characters in this book, and when you started writing this, did you know where this was going to go? Did you have that ending in mind and you were headed toward that, or did that kind of change as you were going? Because it's interesting and really and fascinating in some aspects and fantastic.
Well, thank you. I'll give you a version of the same answer I always give when I'm asked about my intentions, which is, I wish I could pretend, or I could say to you, like, yes, I absolutely knew exactly what I was doing, and I knew exactly where I was going, and I executed my plan to perfection. But that's not how writing works for me. You know, I think of story as the confluence of character and situation. So in this case, I had a woman who, if you strip the story down to its absolute bare essentials, it's almost a little bit of a Greek tragedy in that you have a woman who is, her fatal weakness, her tragic weakness is that she cannot be intimidated and she refuses to back down to anyone. And she's faced with a character whose entire anima is intimidating people into doing what he wants. So what's gonna happen, right, when you put those two things together? That's what I mean, like these two characters in the situation that I put them in leads us to where we end up. But I didn't know exactly where I was going. I knew what I wanted the world to feel like, and I knew that I wanted Babs to be, to have the courage of her convictions. I'm fascinated by people who actually behave according to their beliefs. It seems like such a lost ethic almost these days. And I include myself in that judgment. Like I try to work around the edges of what I believe, you know what I mean? But Babs is just, she's absolutely, she never acts out of fear or greed, sometimes anger, but she behaves according to her principles. And I just really admire and fascinated by people like that. So it's all about like figuring out who the characters are and then just seeing where they go once you put them together. Go ahead.
So a bunch of us, well, first of all, I wanted to say I really love the passages that you read. Never heard of you before, to be honest, but
Most people have.
really loved what I heard. So thanks for coming.
Yeah.
And so there are a bunch of us here that are in the MFA program at Wichita State that are
cool.
here today. So I wanted to ask, like, do you teach fiction?
Yeah.
Okay, so what are one or two like books that you would give to your graduate students to read as training for writers?
Yeah. Have any of you read John Gardner? Do you know John
Yeah.
Gardner? Have you read all of his like craft books?
We're reading notes on what is it called? Artifiction.
Art of fiction, yeah, that's one of the big ones. The one that I teach most often is on becoming a novelist. It's as good and as practical. It's a little anachronistic in its language and its orientation to the world, but it's a hugely formative text for me and it continues to be valuable for my students, I think. And then, I don't know, Chekhov's collected stories. Just read it like 20 times and then read it again.
One last question. I'm going to come over here since we did get one here.
Sorry. When and how did you find your conviction to be a writer?
One more time.
When and how did you find your conviction to be a writer?
Conviction? I'm still not convinced that I'm I don't know, man. Like so many writers I know, I came to this very early. In fact, when my first book was published, my mother, much to my chagrin, had held on to a story that I wrote in first grade. And she had it framed up, and so then I was obligated to hang it somewhere in my house. So I've been at it for a long time. And I think, I started doing it because I love stories so much. And I also love text. I just love text. I like looking at languages that I don't even know. I like looking at Cyrillic. I can't read. I have no idea what Cyrillic is, but I love looking at it. There's something inborn in me that really responds to text. But I was a weird, sort of lonely kid, and I relied on books and music to get myself by, and they did magical things that I wanted to see if I could do. And also I can't do anything else. I'm utterly mediocre at every other aspect of human endeavor. So I didn't really have a choice. I had to make this work. Luckily I've been able to.
All right, can we have another round of applause for Ron? we're good. All right, well, thank you all again for coming. Ron will be signing books, so if you would like to get your book signed, we'll form a line along this side here. We do have copies available for purchase in the back as well. Thank you all so much.
What's up?
So you always spread out. I didn't know this was one of those events where they host it. Oh yeah, I didn't either.
I didn't know I was coming.
Call us all out? Yeah. I was like, here we go.
I had to say something, Dude, that was really cool. I was thinking
I think I'm gonna what you want to do. If they had gone on for longer than this one, some of the theoretical short and then they started spouting. It's like I gotta figure out.
Are you guys the MFA program?
Yeah.
That's what's up.
Yeah.
So at Wichita?
Yeah.
That's what's up.
Cool, man. What's your name?
My name's Lane.
Nice to meet you, Lane. Jack.
So you want to be a writer?
Yeah, I'm in poetry and these three are in fiction.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so this isn't really my genre, but it's still great. You know?
I noticed that every single time you ask, a fiction writer where they found why they wanted to be a writer, they say, "Oh, it's a sad child, and I'm good for nothing else." So.